I'm LaRocco with CNBC, and I'm joined today with Charles van der Steen. He is the Maersk North America President. Charles, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Lauren.
You know, we are at unprecedented times, again, with the logistics industry. I want to dive into how you are navigating during this time. You have four fronts of uncertainty. You have the Red Sea. How long are the diversions going to be going? The Panama Canal, the drought restrictions. On the East Coast, a possible labor strike for both the East Coast ports and the Gulf ports, and also the handicapping of a Trump presidency as it relates to a possible 60% tariff on Chinese goods.
When you list them like this, it feels like an incredible amount of uncertainty, an incredible amount of curveballs that the industry might be faced with over the next period. The reality is, if you look back just 5 years, throughout those 5 years, every single year would have had 1, 2, in some cases maybe 4 of those similar challenges that the industry was faced with. The global supply chain is one of incredible volatility and incredible uncertainty, which, if you want to be successful leveraging the global supply chain as you need it within your organization, you need to be agile and you need to be knowing where you're going together with your partner. So what we've truly internalized over those last few years is that communication is indeed key, collaboration is key, deep collaboration is key, and as these uncertainties present themselves, how do you now make sure you prepare for mitigation of the potential risk that comes from it? And what we do on an ongoing basis, customer by customer, review based upon the footprint of their supply chain. What do things look like? What could potentially present itself? And what is our current thinking, our joint thinking, as to how we would mitigate it? Based upon that assessment, again, per customer, we plot out together what would be the best plan for the next few months. Which triggers do we establish as when we would potentially have a diversion, potentially have another action than the one we had yesterday, and then agree upon how do we now make sure we embed it in our joint organization.
In terms of the East Coast labor negotiations, we are in contract season right now. And so shippers, the Walmarts of the world, the Home Depots of the world, they're factoring this in now. What are you hearing during contract season in terms of East Coast trade moving to the West Coast? What are you seeing as of right now?
We're not seeing anything real material in terms of large preparations for a potential diversion. And when we say large, it's not dissimilar from the preparations that we saw in anticipation of the negotiations here on the West Coast, which means that clearly there's uncertainty. There's a date. The date is at the end of September. And at this stage, our prediction, our expectation as an industry is that we would hope collectively that after that everything just continues to be normal. However, of course, the uncertainty is that we don't 100% know whether it would indeed be the case. So as part of contracting season, together with our customers, we see on an ongoing basis the question emerge as to what level should we be ready to potentially make decisions for different inland locations, for different routing of our cargo, and how do we then prepare for that as part of the contract. So it's a part of the discussion, but at this stage, it's, again, not dissimilar from the same preparations that were had for the negotiations on the West Coast.
In terms of what the contracts are looking like this year, are you seeing like some of the larger shippers looking to see like a 3-month out where saying, hey, listen, in 3 months, can we revisit what the rate would be, just because there is so many things going on right now, factoring, their decisions of going either East Coast or West Coast?
And maybe that's an answer to your question, but from a different angle, what we do see as part of the preparations is that most shippers, I would almost argue nearly everyone already today, have a route footprint that covers both East Coast and West Coast, and some of them cover the Gulf also. Mm-hmm. So the opportunity or the optionality of using some of those entry points that they already have today, but simply have a higher volume, almost everyone has within their contract footprint today. The bigger question, of course, is how do you now mitigate to the largest extent possible for a true and full lockdown, even though the last time that happened is a very, very long time ago? And how would you be able, also from our side, to build that into your contract? Those discussions at this stage are very, very early stages, and the real core, the gist of the discussion we have now is let's just make sure that the contracts have a component that allow you to have different entry points. And then as part of those one-on-one discussions that we started out talking by is let's make sure that we stay close to each other, see how things develop, and as they develop, we can decide to leverage up or down some of these entry points in terms of volumes.
I know it's a little bit early for peak season talk, but you guys have to plan for it. What are your expectations for this peak season?
We expect at this stage a normalized peak season. So we do expect, as what we would normally have seen in years prior to the pandemic, prior to last year, because last year also was, of course, not a normalized year. We believe that this is the first year that to a large degree can be compared to a pre-COVID era. And from that perspective, we expect a normalized peak, which means you just look at the year, you take the first half compared to the second half. Mm-hmm. We expect that the second half will, by definition, have higher level of volumes to a certain percentage pointage, depending on, of course, the industry that's shipping. But if you take the retail industry, it's clear that the normal peak, as we expected today, is part of our planning.
Let's talk Panama Canal in terms of the situation right now. And it all really depends on Mother Nature. What's your strategy there? What are clients asking you as they're heading into, their spring and summer items?
Very good question, and a very topical and I guess very relevant item also today. Today we can still manage the situation of the Panama Canal without a real material impact on our network. However, we've also seen that the situation hasn't necessarily improved. The impact of the current weather pattern is uncertain for the next few months. Panama is going into its dry season, so it's not clear at this stage whether the situation will improve. If it would further deteriorate, what we are today discussing with customers are a multitude of options. Probably the primary option is, do you need to accept the fact that your East Coast opportunities, your East Coast flows might have at some stage a need for reduction? And if so, how would you then navigate those reductions? Where for us, we spoke about it last time, we're looking across the West Coast for different entry points. Mexico is an active one that we've been working on together with our customers, together with the rails, together with the entire footprint of the supply chain as to whether we can also see that as an entry point. But the same is the case for the Pacific Northwest and Southern California, which is one side of the potential solution. The other solution takes a little bit more time is, do you need to use the Panama Canal? You take what is potentially the eastern route. So is there an opportunity for the supply chain to be directed differently from origin, avoid the Panama Canal altogether and enter the United States through the eastern route, which could then still allow you to go to the Gulf or to any of the East Coast ports? The challenge, of course, of that routing today is the Red Sea, which also implies that just by definition, your routing will be longer. Yeah. But again, today, we can manage. If the situation further deteriorates, we'll need to review some of those options that we are preparing and see which ones for which customers are the most relevant to pull.
The last time we spoke with the Red Sea, the outlook was anywhere second quarter, third quarter. The Houthis are not stopping. We have had a vessel that has sunk. Unfortunately, thankfully, all the seafarers are okay there. What are you guys looking at as of right now, and how far ahead in advance? I don't think people appreciate the amount of planning that logistics takes. It is not a short-term game. This is long-term. So is there a certain time frame that you're kind of building in as to what next steps you have to do in order to build out whatever infrastructure, whatever service offerings you may have to do for, say, the third or fourth quarter?
So most of the work, it's a very relevant question, of course. Most of the work has already been done at the back end of December and early January as the situation presented itself. You're right, this is a long-term planning game. Just by definition, a reset of a network would normally take you anywhere between 4 and 6 months. Most of our peers, including ourselves, have had to do it within a period of weeks. Yeah. But what it meant is that now, in today's environment, almost everyone has a network that has been reset, and has been reset from the perspective that we do not pass through the Suez Canal. We take the longer route, and as a result, that's been factored into our network, which has meant the influx of additional capacity, the influx of additional transit times, etc. So from a perspective of network planning, the brunt of the work has actually been done. It also means what the brunt that has been done is not so much just resetting the network, but also being ready for when the network would be changed again. Which means that if, and let's hope that the situation does indeed very quickly improve the overall and very unfortunate situation, we would be able to quite quickly reset our network again to now go and pass through the Suez Canal in a period of what would be, again, maybe a month to 2 months. So the hard work, the urgent work, and the unexpected work was all done at the back end of December and January, which has also meant that for now, we are able to navigate the situation with short time sprints, where if the situation improves itself, we're able to quite quickly action and reset our network anew. If it lasts longer, we have a network that right now is set to be managing the current situation.
You know, Sea Intelligence just recently released the vessel on time, if you will, with the schedules. And clearly you could see all the ocean carriers that are moving around the Horn of Africa, it is not, it's taking longer. Those that are still, traversing up through the Suez, they're more on time, so to speak. The longer that this goes, do you see that you might have to add additional capacity?
Yes, so that has already been done. So,
yes.
so most of that additional capacity was added in the beginning of January.
Yeah.
And we're talking significant capacity simply because you are adding anywhere between 2 and 3 weeks to your overall transit time. So most of that has been done, which has also meant, and quite likely not just for Maersk, but also for our peers in the market, that global networks have been impacted because capacity would have had to be rerouted into these routes, which needed more capacity to be able to compensate the longer transit times.
Because I think the last time, my number could be wrong, my apologies, you were saying like 6% you added.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Do you think you might go more?
You needed 6% more. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you think you're going to need more, or it depends on the peak season and the orders?
Right now, we think that percentage still holds.
Okay.
It was effectively anywhere between 6 and 8%. We don't see that percentage materially move over the next period, including the peak season that would be a normalized peak season. Of course, we don't know whether the situation further deteriorates. It could potentially have a larger impact on your capacity over the longer time.
Now, your company is more than vessels. It's air, it's ground, it's so exciting. And I wanted to take this time to kind of talk about in terms of where you're seeing the pockets of opportunity for the company when you're looking at the vast North American network that you have built out and you are building out. Let's take Mexico. How excited are you about Mexico, and where are you in terms of this build out and in terms of how much capacity you might be able to bring in and disperse?
I'm happy that you refer to this question. So we are indeed, in the meantime, a lot more than just an ocean carrier. Yeah. We refer to ourselves, of course, as the integrator of logistics.
Yes.
And we've built ourselves over the past 5 to 6 years a network that allows us to be so. I think to put this into context, the most important starting point would be what we literally just discussed, is the knowledge that the global supply chain is one that is fraught with a perennial set of uncertainties that can present themselves at any given time. Our firm belief has been, for any company to be successful, that is leaning on a global supply chain, the ability to be agile in mitigating those uncertainties and the risks that come with it, you'll need someone who's able to help you navigate those ultimately treacherous waters of the global supply chain. What we've now been able to create with the network of existing terminals, ocean vessels, distribution centers, trucks, and ultimately planes, we've been able to allow our customers, if you think about their cocktail of success, growth, a reduction of cost, or a mitigation of risks, to speak heavily into those first, let's say the first and the third one. So the ability for them to continue to grow, the ability for them to mitigate their risks with the partners such as Maersk is now significantly increased. Should they have a risk that presents itself in the Red Sea. Should they have a risk that presents itself anywhere else, we now have the ability, using our network, to provide them optionality that they otherwise would not have. We spoke about it last time. Sea air. The Red Sea now presents an increase in transit time of 3 weeks. What if we just take whatever is already on the water, redirect it to a Dubai and put it on an airplane and make sure that the commitment that our customers made to their customers can still be fulfilled, and allow them, when compared to their competition, to be there when it's needed, to be there where the customer needs the goods, as opposed to potentially some of their peers that would not have had the same opportunity, which significantly builds into their ability to grow. The same is the case on the mitigation of risk. If we see a continued risk presenting themselves, whether that's the Panama Canal, whether that's the union negotiations, we now have an opportunity to decide for our customers whether or not we need a different entry point into the US, whether we need a different entry point from a modality point of view, by air, by rail, or by vessel. If we now look at Mexico, we've seen, as you've highlighted, a considerable amount of growth coming out of Mexico, where nearshoring or friendshoring has become a reality over the last few years. What we've seen as a large opportunity to offer to our customers is by using our terminals in Lázaro, by using the connection with rails, by using our footprint of distribution centers, we're now able to also provide our customers an opportunity to serve their North American market through an entry that is no longer just the west coast of the US or the east coast of the US, but could also be through Mexico.
Speaking of Mexico, last year, of course, they became the United States' largest trading partner. But one of the drivers, in addition to the friendshoring or nearshoring, is 15% of Chinese goods went through the ports in Mexico to avert the Trump trade tariffs, which are still in act. I've spoken with some logistics and shippers experts, and they've told me that they're handicapping a Trump win. And Trump recently said that he was considering a tariff of 60% on Chinese goods. That effectively would just kill the Trans-Pacific trade route. From your knowledge right now, how much more capacity can you welcome through your gateway, if you will? Because that's really what it is, what your company is. It's a gateway for containers. It's a gateway for trade. How much capacity, what kind of opportunity can the Mexico ports actually take in? Because if you do have any additional tariffs that do come in, may not be 60%, it could be higher.
Yes.
You're going to anticipate more coming in. What are your expectations in terms of that growth potential?
And now, of course, you need to see this as a perspective of Maersk. We've been preparing over the last few years quite a bit for a significant increase of activity from Mexico. Not just related to China, but related in general towards a mitigation of supply chain risk for anything that is further away. Could be Southeast Asia, could be South Asia, could even be Europe. So the preparations that we've made, including into our terminals, including into our network, have actually allowed us to prepare for what could be a significant increase in volumes, regardless of whether that's induced by a tariff or just by what we expect is a continued growth of nearshoring, simply to mitigate the supply chain risk on the back of shorter transit times. So our take has been, this is a mega trend that will continue to develop itself in any case, and everything that we do, when we think 3, 5, 10 years out, is supporting that trend to continue and our ability to service it.
One of the things I wanted to discuss was looking at the investments that you make. And one of that, of course, is green technology with the fleets. Explain from a long-term perspective why this is the best ROI that the company can have. And more importantly, given what's going on with the longer sea route, it'd be great to have these more of these vessels out, because unfortunately it is releasing more emissions out there just because of the longer trade route. But let's talk about you in terms of the methanol and the vision of why you chose that green energy over the potpourri of others that are out there.
I think the starting point of the answer to that question is that ROI, it's a wonderful word to think about. If you think about sustainability, was not at the core of our decision making when we made the decision to take this direction, which meant that the reason for us to completely change our fleet to become a 100% sustainable zero footprint fleet was built upon our genuine belief that it's the right thing to do for the planet and it's the right thing to do for the people on that planet. That was a starting point. If you now look at the economical or financial component and start thinking about our customers or the consumers, then we do believe that if you look out into the future, the weight that individual governments will continue to put onto what could be more damaging technologies, more damaging emissions from our industry, so from the logistics industry, emissions that would be fueled by traditional fuel, if you will continue to become more punitive, will continue to be high, and as a result, the economical choice for the industry will slowly but surely move towards the sustainable side of things, and it simply becomes, in that sense, a better ROI. For us, however, the starting point clearly was a different one, even though it will ultimately help our customers to quite likely be more cost efficient in the very near future.
When you were talking about the investments and what makes sense, there's that trend, of course, of the very large vessels, right, that carry tremendous amounts of containers. There's a lot of infrastructure that has to go into that, right, when it comes to the ports to make sure that they can get in and all of that. For you, it's more cost of scale to have a very large vessel that can carry another 10,000 containers versus a more green vessel. Where do you see like this trend for the industry? Because we have seen, as what some people call them, the mega ships. Is that going to be something in terms of like, if you build a large vessel, it makes more sense because you can carry more in one journey? Or are people going to have to start looking at saying, well, what's best for the planet?
I think that the two don't necessarily correlate with each other. And what I mean by this is the mega ships, as you refer to them, the largest ships on specific trades might be absolutely relevant in terms of optimization of what is ultimately a very global network of container vessels that are connected. We don't think that the sustainability angle is related because we would believe that even the larger ships can be methanol fueled, can be entirely built upon a zero footprint, and hence that doesn't so much have a connection. When you look at the way in which an ocean network is built up, it's not very dissimilar from any other transportation network where you'll find that certain corridors are very large in their size, are very large in their volumes. For those corridors, it might effectively be very relevant over time to further scale up the size of your vessel simply because the volume is there and it would allow you to be more efficient. But we've also seen, and that's very clearly what we've seen over the last 5 years, that the amount of corridors for which these very, very large vessels and increasing capacity are truly the right solution has actually been diminishing. So what we at this stage have within our network and what we are continuing to prepare for is a healthy mix, a combination of what will be large vessels, medium vessels and smaller vessels to allow ourselves to remain nimble in what will and will continue to be an increasing breadth of the global supply chain, more countries being added to it, more ports being added to it, where, to your point, not every single infrastructure is geared towards a large vessel or a mega vessel to be catering to everything that comes with it.
They're great to look at, but they're gigantic in the amount that you have to put in terms of it's millions upon millions of dollars with the dredging and all of that to make sure that you can safely bring these vessels in. You know, you touched on earlier about collaboration. And part of collaboration is also working in alliances. And, you know, Maersk has had some news, a little bit of breaking up, but then a new marriage, so to speak, with Hapag-Lloyd. Talk to me about alliances and in terms of why they're needed, right? And how that helps, right? In terms of like that teamwork mentality of like, okay, I've got my ship, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, let's go.
The starting point, and that's also been the primary reason for which the new collaboration model that we've now entered into with Hapag-Lloyd has been chosen to be the one that we'll go for the future. The starting point is, if you think about how the supply chain works, and then specifically looking at, in this case, the ocean supply chain, there is a limit as to how many network components you can build into your own network, unless you want to continue to increase your own capacity. So that's part one. So for us to be able to offer our customers a wide enough variety, a wide enough optionality of feeding into the global supply chain, it's important to partner with someone to increase the breadth of your network. So that's part one, which is not only an economical decision, but it's a service decision, which we believe is important for our customers. That's part one. The other part is very much linked to what we spoke about, the integrated vision that Maersk ultimately pursues, where the ocean component is a component, just one component of the global supply chain of our customers. Typically, they would have trucks that need to fill their supply chain. They would have planes. They might have trains. But if you think about what's crucial in the supply chain, it's the ability to reduce variability, the ability to reduce risk of variability, and have a more consistent supply chain based upon which they can make their planning, based upon which they can make sure that whenever you and I want to buy something or need to buy something, we effectively have what we need on the shelf from their supply chain. The alliance, and in this case the collaboration with Hapag-Lloyd, is one where two parties have the same view on the component of reliability, and the absolute improvement of it on an ongoing basis is crucial to the relationship with our customers, which for us means quite an important thing. If we are able to break what is still today a ceiling in ocean reliability of anywhere between 80 and 85%, and deliver a 90 to 95% reliability, we're able to offer our customers a significant reduction in the variability or an increase in consistency of their supply chain in terms of on-time performance, and as a result, a reduction of inventory costs, an increase of sales. Together with, in this case, our partner Hapag-Lloyd, we're able to drive that accountability for reliability jointly up to a level where our customers can enjoy a materially higher reliability. That's the primary reason for which these alliances are so crucial, and in our case, this alliance, this combination is so crucial.